Okay, and we're back. So you all probably heard me singing a little bit earlier. It is the last session of the day, so I'm quite pumped. And this is actually a very interesting panel that we have for you today. It's EdTech Focus Venture Capitalists. But I'm going to let our moderator for the discussion talk a little bit more about that in a second. So Anne is our Chief Operating Officer here at Chatterbug, and she's also the co-founder and CEO of Scene Ventures, a Berlin-focused early-stage startup accelerator. Very exciting. Anne is an entrepreneur with a passion for startups, previously growing online fine food company Dillanero. Is that right, Anne? Dillanero?
Yes, it is right.
Okay, as CEO until its successful acquisition. So welcome, Anne. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about today's session, and I can't wait to meet Ross and David today, who for the first time we have a VC panel in ChatterConf, which we've never had before. And so this is going to be super, super cool.
Super exciting. Okay, awesome. Well, I will let you handle that, and then we can bring the others on.
Yeah. I wonder how many people are actually joining as a morning session, as an evening session. I think we have, hello, Ross, how are you?
Hello, you've got a morning session for me. I'm Pacific time.
Same here. How about you, David?
Hi guys. Well, I'm in Paris, so it's all right. It's evening, late afternoon session. It's all good.
Cool, great. Okay, so we got the technical stuff figured out, and then we can start. So, to our audience today, again, good morning, good evening, good day, whatever it is time-wise for you, wherever you are in this world. Thank you so much for investing your time today with us on this last session of ChatterConf 2022. I'm Anne, and I'm very, very excited to be your host today for our panel discussion on the motivation of learning, right? So we'll explore how modern education companies find innovative ways to keep learners learning, a problem of engagement that we've seen, well, from the very first day when education was born, right? So I have the pleasure to have two very interesting and very knowledgeable panelists in our round today, bringing on the business or VC kind of perspective on learning engagement to the table, backed by many years of investing into edtech companies of many sorts and kinds. So first of all, yet again, welcome and thank you so much for being here to David from Brighteye Ventures and to Ross from Owl Ventures. It's an honor to have you guys here today, and I can't wait to kick off our discussion. So the way I want to organize our panel today, our 45 minutes that we have, is I want to take a couple of minutes in the beginning for each of you to kind of introduce yourselves, to tell us, what excites you about edtech and the investment space you're in. And then we'll dive into our topic, guided by a couple of questions and themes that we can discuss. And then I want to spend the last 10 to 15 minutes opening up the floor to our audience for taking the opportunities. If anyone who's watching has specific questions or wants to make comments or wants to, give compliments, whatever it is, you can do so throughout the entirety of our panel today, but I'll take the last bit to kind of consolidate and then discuss with both of our panelists, Ross and David. Okay, let's get started. So Ross, you have an early career in education consulting. You have a background in private equity. You're a principal at Owl Ventures, one of the biggest venture capitalist firms for education technology. And you've served at many boards of edtech companies, including actually, and that's particularly exciting, I think, in this context, a company called Preply, a language learning company. But altogether, your background screams education through and through, right? So maybe you can tell us a little bit about why the education market is seemingly fascinating to you and to the state. That'd be nice.
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned, I'm an investor at Owl Ventures. We're the largest education-focused venture fund globally. And we focus exclusively on the education market. So our full thesis is around, investing anywhere learning takes place. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, I think the first reason is education is really just one of the largest sectors of the economy, really after healthcare. So sort of, if you sort of look globally, that number is, I think, $6 trillion. Growing really, really rapidly, as it's just sort of one of the best paths towards, sort of betterment around the globe. What's really interesting about that $6 trillion spend, though, is that when you look at other parts of the economy, almost something between 15 and 20% of sort of the spend in the sector typically is devoted to technology. And so whether that's healthcare technology, whether that's sort of technology in the enterprise, that is not true in education. In education, that number is closer to 3%. And so when you sort of look at the sort of software explosion that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years, as other parts of the economy have sort of hit that 15 to 20%. What's exciting about education is we sort of have the opportunity to look into the future when we look at everything else and say, hey, as education makes that change, there's just going to be huge shifts in sort of the educational landscape. And so we think education will sort of catch up to the rest of the economy there, and it's going to create incredible opportunities for all companies sort of in the space here, as they become more efficient, as they are able to better personalize learning, as they're able to reach more students all across the globe. So I think for us, that's one of the reasons that the sector is especially exciting. And then the other piece of it is just sort of the outcomes are so exciting when you sort of look at education, and sort of the life, sort of the improvements in sort of life, happiness and life outcomes that you sort of see from education are just incredibly exciting, whether that's language learning and sort of the ability to access the global job market or something else. So I'll stop there, but I think it's a great space to be in.
Very nice. Thank you so much. I'll kick it off to David. You're currently the principal of Brighteye Ventures, a VC that invests into early companies where tech, education, and media mingle. So that's an interesting take. You're equipped with a background in consulting to some degree as well, followed by years of actually experience operating as an operator, leading marketing efforts for I think a health startup in Mexico. And so I'm actually interested for that intro, like tell us a little bit about, I guess, that journey and what ultimately interests you in the educational investment landscape that you're in right now with Brighteye. And, because you've lived in Mexico, how good is your Spanish? And did you actually learn Spanish very effectively when living there?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Yes, actually, yeah, and I'm married to a Mexican woman. So yes, I speak Spanish, so it's pretty handy. Anyway, so yeah. Look, I'm French. Pretty sure you heard the lovely French accent, and I started my career in Mexico, as you rightly said. So, interestingly, so the journey. I mean, the key takeaway is that consulting, service industry. Then I went into the trenches. This is how I like to put it. We raised, it was a healthcare startup in Mexico City. We raised Series A and a Series B round while I was there. So I was lucky enough to be around and to really experience the growth from the inside. I essentially built the marketing from scratch there. I always joke about that. Please, guys, don't ask me how I did the transition from management consulting to operational marketing, but it worked. Spent 4 years there, and it was a brilliant and enriching experience. To all the founders, I deeply respect you. I know it's tough. It was really tiring for me at the end. I have to admit that. And I really wanted to go back to the service industry. And VC was the dream job. So it took some time. As you know, I started working with some VCs in Mexico, but that's not the point here. And then I stumbled upon Brighteye in Europe, a new edtech fund. So I had no clue about the edtech space. I was a complete outsider. I know it was an upcoming trend, including in Mexico it was in 2017, 2016, 2017. And yeah, I just fell in love with the mission, really. Blue ocean market in Europe, amazing talent, not a single specialist fund in 2017 backing these edtech entrepreneurs here in Europe. And two other things that were obviously that was the bet for Brighteye, our first fund, which was Europe is essentially following the US. We're lagging behind in terms of two trends. The first one is willingness to pay for educational product. As we know, or as most people know, Europe people are used to free education or very cheap education. That the bet was like, hey, this is changing somehow. You're gonna have like private education that is growing and people willing to pay for that. First trend, and the second one was the digital penetration at home, at school, and so on. Not only tablets, but broadband access, mentality. Parents say like, oh yeah, actually I can use some apps to teach my kids how to learn English or whatever. So these are really those three things that got me extremely excited. And this is the genesis of Brighteye, really. Blue ocean market, amazing talent pool, no specialist funds, and these two trends, digital penetration and willingness to pay. And yeah, and I'm back to be back, and I'm really happy to be back on the service side of things. I have to say, it's 90% reflection, 10% action, while being an operator is 90% action and 10% reflection. So yeah, pretty happy.
That is a very interesting thing for me to write down and use in a future way, because you're totally right. Like, but I find it interesting if VC comes in with operational experience to the table, because you have a different look at what people go through and what companies go through, and what occupies the mind in any stage of growth, really, right? So I always value that a lot, and it's very interesting to me. Great, so thank you for the intros. I think I want to, kind of kick it off a little bit more general before we dive into kind of our theme for today. Both of you have mentioned that, edtech in general has grown very rapidly over the past decade, right? And now, not to the least with global lockdowns disrupting really fundamental ways how we learn and teach. So it's no surprise that we can see the industry boom sparking so many companies that innovate on how we learn today, right? And that's accompanied by more and more funding, which is also exciting to see, in which you're experts on, obviously. And so I was wondering from a VC perspective, how have you seen trends in online education shift in the last decade? And what do you think is the most interesting possibilities for the future? Is like, how will we actually learn, in the future? Do you have some thoughts on this? Maybe we can start with Ross.
Yeah, happy to kick off. I think there's been sort of a shift over time. So, when the first maybe batch of companies focused on online education really just focused, I think, on digitizing content, right? So saying, hey, what is content that's existed in books? How can we make it accessible to more people, right? And so that was, taking textbooks, putting them online. I think maybe a second wave was focused on, hey, if we have it online, maybe now we can add video, right? We can add audio. We can add, make it, maybe make it slightly more interactive. And so adding a level of engagement to sort of that digitized content is maybe sort of a second wave. And all of that, obviously, it helps increase both access and engagement, which is super important. I think now where we're seeing sort of more of the focus starting to take place is really on personalization and data. And so can we really figure out where each student is at in their learning journey? Can we give them sort of the right content for them? And this has been a trend for a while. I think this is sort of always a goal in education, but I think it's one we're still far from completion on. And David, obviously, you can sort of tell me how far you think we are, but the more that you can offer the student the right content at the right time, and really understand where they're at, and then sort of get data back, which says, hey, if you provide this sort of nudge to a student who's struggling on reading, it's most likely to help. But if they maybe if they're 3 years older student, a different nudge is really what's helpful for them. And then also providing that data back to teachers and parents, so that they can sort of help their students really effectively. So we're seeing a lot of time spent right now on sort of technology that sort of helps teachers understand, if I look at my class, who do I need to go spend a little bit more time with, who can sort of help themselves. And so really thinking about sort of some of the data, in that way. And then I think, I think a lot of the sort of future facing, components of that are going to be plays on those similar themes. So engagement, personalization, and data, but maybe in different ways. So engagement now, folks are talking about for the future, is it something like VR? Is it something like, is it community? Which is, community has been around forever, but, taking what may have been, 30 people taking an online course effectively separately, how can you actually have them work together? How can you have one student, basically, how can you, using data, figure out which student is like just far enough ahead of a next student that they can actually crystallize their learning by teaching that other student and helping them along. And so I think all of the sort of future facing innovations are really plays on some of those same themes.
Yeah, the last thing you said, and maybe I'm being too upfront and taking this away, but like the aspect of the potential impact of like bringing social back into learning that has been missing in online spheres a lot of times, right? Where we're trying to kind of move away from this for a long time of bringing AI and artificializing kind of the experience, and now looking at the opportunity, how can we make that very, to quote David here, that very fundamental social thing of learning more social again, right? And so David, I read some publication you did, and where you're kind of going into exactly the sphere of like, how can we use, like, to be more specific, how can we use communities to kind of produce this ultimate, engaged and motivated learners, and like, what's the power of community, and how can we even, interpret community not in a way where it's some forum that gets used for support issues and stuff like this, but how can we move into a sphere where community plays a much more fundamental role in the product itself, right? So I would love to hear about this, because this is a very, very interesting angle on exactly our challenge. Like, how do you keep having someone come back to actually produce learning success? Because if people, we can have the greatest curricula and we can have the greatest like effectiveness in the system, if people don't come back on average, then we're not getting anywhere. So please tell us a little bit about learning communities, or LearnCom, to kind of see what's the power that's laying there. And do you know any companies that actually are going in the sphere and then are excelling in this space?
Sure, yeah, and actually, this is the one of the biggest trends for the last decade. To strengthen Ross's point here, is moving from static content to live peer-to-peer community learning, and obviously accessing the content at the right time. So yeah, actually, community, it's interesting because it started as a lever for companies, edtech companies, to just increase stickiness, essentially. So the first wave really over the past 3-4 years has been, okay, so I'm going to create great content, you're going to consume it, and just to increase, to try to drive the engagement up and increase completion rate, because essentially a MOOC we all know that completion rates are terrible. So we're going to add this kind of like a community on top of it, right? So you consume the content and then you can talk to your peers, you can interact, you can ask questions and so on. That has been successful, really. We have a few companies in our portfolio that are doing it really, really well. The first one in Spain that is called the Power Business School. That was a Power MBA, they just renamed. Another one, it's a French one, it's called U School, which is an online school for regulated, it's interesting, but it's for regulated blue-collar services. So if you want to become a hairdresser, a patissier, a baker, and so on. And they really community is an amazing aspect of what they're doing. And interestingly, it works. Why does it work? And I really believe and on deck and so on, right? You have like many other stuff, but I really believe it works for 3-4 reasons. The first one, the most important one, is that it creates accountability between students, right? So the accountability is essentially, okay, so I'm going to help you achieve your learning goals, and in return, you're going to help me achieve mine. Okay, so that's the first one. Accountability is the main one, really. The second one is relationship, right? It's you develop relationships. It's linked to accountability, obviously, but it works because you care about people, and you develop these relationships with your peers, and that works because it makes you just care about them. It's not like, like if we are in this together, if you're put in a room with a bunch of people with the common characteristics, essentially. So it works. It creates this kind of like magical place where that you have my back, I have your back, and it increases the interaction. Okay. The third thing, really, why I believe the community aspect of the learn come to work, it's because of the sense of belonging. Okay. So this one, essentially, it feels good. Right, it feels good to be a member of community of On Deck or the Power Business School or whatever, right? And obviously, some people argue that there are some like selectivity credentials, and there are some status tied to that. But this is why I think it's super interesting, and it makes the learning. This is one mechanism. There are several, right? But one mechanism of increasing motivation is community, really, this human touch. Like just what Chatterbug does, in all honesty. Chatterbug does, we have another company in our portfolio that is called Tandem, which is a language learning platform that connects people together so they can learn a new language together. And it works. It really, really works, because I fundamentally believe that humans, we like talking to each other. We like interacting, engaging with each other. So and that applies for anything, not only education. So yeah, that's a big factor of creating accountability, sense of belonging, and simply building a relationship that drives engagement over time. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a really long summary. I hope it's not too in the weeds, but anyway.
No, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, Tandem actually had a talk today as well. So here we close the circle, I guess.
Exactly.
Ross, speaking about accountability and communities, I think you also have talked about like a company that kind of takes this approach on a more general terms called Fiveable, to kind of create study groups where people learn together and can hold themselves accountable for their learning outcomes, right? And so, do you agree with what David was saying? And want to kind of get your perspective on the whole of all the things that we can do to kind of engage a learner and make their learning success more likely, I guess, from forming habits and gamification and all of that, right? Like, is social language learning and community really the one thing that we believe is kind of the unlocking secret sauce, if you want, for bringing people back and making them stay and making them successful and whatever they're learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly agree with David that I think community is sort of one of the key unlocks, especially when it comes to engagement. I think it does create a sense of accountability. So Fiveable, as you mentioned, they're effectively, sort of online study rooms for high schoolers. And the idea is, is effectively the students sort of all commit, with each other in a room to say, hey, let's, be really productive for 15 minutes. Here's all of our checklists, to go through items. And then at the end of, and you can choose the time, 25 minutes, we take a 5-minute break all together. But for those, for those 25 minutes, we're all online together. We're all, we're all sort of staying on this screen. We're keeping our videos on, our voice on, just so, you can see, hey, like, Ross is slacking off. He's like sort of just, staring off into space, or he's falling asleep or whatever it is. And somebody sort of can call you out on it. And so it's helpful for sort of that sense of accountability. I think it's important for that sense of fun, right? I mean, especially when it comes to something like language learning, most of us are learning language so that we can speak to somebody. It's for that social connection. And so, not only is it a good way to practice, but it's also like the whole reason you're doing it in many cases. So it is sort of that fun, I think there's like an element of fun to it that sort of is also really important for that engagement. And then I think just for like everyone's mental health, like just like totally separate from like the learning environment, there's something, I think humans tend to be social beings. And so the more we can introduce that, into the learning sphere, the more it won't feel like a separate part of folks' lives, but just sort of a part of their life, right? And so I think that sort of just leads to that longer term retention, sticking with it, even maybe past one class, but just sort of in terms of that lifelong learning. If it's sort of someplace that folks see as sort of a social part of their lives as well. So certainly, I'd say in 100% agreement with David on that.
And I'm sorry if I may jump in here. It's great. Another mechanism that works, is Russ is right, and there is another one that is that we've seen that is interesting. It's language learning. This company is called Twanix. It's essentially a B2B managed marketplace to help employees improve their business English, right, according to their role and functions. So these guys, what they do, it's a Spanish company. They create learning paths that are tied to a specific outcome, right? So say you're not you're a marketer at L'Oreal or whatever big company you want to think of, and you have like this big meeting coming up in 4 weeks or whatever in English, right? Because you have to present something to the board. I don't know, right? And so you actually create these paths to prep you for this meeting. So you learn English, it's focused on conversation, not grammar. It's really focused only on conversation. And it's really tied to, hey, I have this meeting, I'm a marketer, I have this meeting. So I have to learn like marketing vocabulary, have to learn how to communicate my ideas in a clear way and so on. So that is another mechanism that has been working, that I've seen that works to make it, to just, as Rose said, you learn a new language because you want to speak to someone. So if you have like this travel, I'm traveling to Mexico in 4 months or whatever, and I want to, I don't know, be able to speak basic Spanish with a few people to get around. So this is a goal, right? So if you work towards that goal, that increase the motivation all the time too. Yeah, just wanted to share that because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean that's super interesting, right? It merges into this project-based learning where I actually have a reason to put down an effort, and I have a very clear goal in the near future, and that makes it more applicable, I guess, and less a thing of a void. Okay, so interesting. One question I have, from an investment standpoint, right? I'm curious on this has been, I guess, my entire career. I've always what do cohorts look like? How many people come back? How often do they engage? How do you create people that are actually liking your product and finding value in it? How does activation look like? And I'm curious what you look at when you are presented with a new company. In the space, can be language learning, can be any other skill set that people teach. How do you evaluate if the company has figured out or is on the right path of really, keeping their community, their user base engaged, and then eventually being able to monetize them as well? How do you look at that? What are KPIs? I guess it's maybe hard to generalize that a little bit, but maybe you can give some examples.
I'm happy to jump in, and then David, I'm sure you look at it, differently in some cases, same in other cases, but and I think you hit the nail on the head. Is I spend a lot of time sort of looking at the cohort graphs, right? And so if I'm for the batch of learners that started in February of 2021, how long is that cohort sticking around, and then and not just, it's not just sort of what is 3 month retention, what is 6 month retention on a pure basis. Language learning is, it's a really interesting market. It's like going to the gym or like a diet. It's something that people aspire. It's very aspirational, right? Learning a language, it's something everybody wishes they were better at it. They wish they could speak more languages, but it's something that's really hard. It's really hard, and it's really hard to stick with. And so, and it is something that sometimes, to David's point, maybe you are going to Spain in 6 months, and you're going with a bunch of friends who want to learn for it, and then afterwards you're not going to Spain again for 5 years, right? Like it's not, you can't afford to go every, so. It's not always bad either, right? Like in the same way for like a diet or a gym, that you may have a big wedding or a big event that you're sort of trying to get in really good shape for, and then you don't have to be quite as good afterwards. And so we don't want to sort of penalize a company if that's not what they're good at. But there's definitely a subset of learners who are there to learn for the long term, really want to become fluent. And so what you want to see in your cohorts is sort of a nice leveling off over time, is as you do sort of see the folks that maybe just had an event in a couple of weeks they wanted to go to. Maybe we're just trying to brush up. Those folks may curve off, but if you can keep your sort of long tail of learners for a long time, the folks that are really learning for work, for fluency, if you can sort of continue to engage those learners, I think that's sort of a really good sign. And then any sort of, but the goal shouldn't be necessarily to keep everybody forever, right? Because hopefully you can actually get somebody to be fluent, and then they can naturally turn off, right? And so the other thing we do try to look at when we can is are they just progressing according to some scale or test that you can use that is sort of ability to sort of reach just that next level of sort of language proficiency. And I think that's I think that can be overlooked when all you do is look at cohorts. One language learning company can get somebody a lot further in 6 months than another. That makes a huge difference to the learner, and their NPS, their willingness to refer other students will go a lot further if they, even if they're churning after 6 months because they already went and spoke Spanish with their friends in Barcelona. So I think those sort of two in combination.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it, I guess. Like one of the learnings I personally had in looking at our language learning company is that and from personal experience as well, learning other languages, is that you don't always have this steep upward intensive learning curve where you're always just intensifying your learning endeavor, right? Like you have waves of high intensity, and then you go on vacation and you want to do a little bit less of this because you don't want to have your private tutor work with you around the city and explain stuff because you're not locally there, right? But you want to keep up to date with some of the stuff. So one of the interesting things that we came across was like we kind of need to be there for the learner at wherever they are in their language learning endeavor, right? Which is kind of interesting. Like, how do you make sure you have someone who, and I'm quoting some of our co-founders here, who likes the idea of language learning, something you also touched upon, right? And kind of needs this first phase of falling in love with it and then really doubling down because maybe they met someone, they're moving, or they're attending university or stuff like that, right? Versus someone who's much further down the line and being like, well, I have to get into university admissions in 2 months and I need a B2 level German, right? So it's very different stages of a learner. And like one thing that we're coming across is like, how do we meet the learner at their stage of the learning journey, right? And so that's kind of my comment on what you said a little bit from our experience. But I also want to give it to David to kind of comment on what was said.
And thank you for sharing that. That's actually an interesting point. What you said, I've not thought about it. So it's gave me food for thought here, and thanks for that. Look, just to add to that, I would say really the main one for me is the learning outcome. Really, is it like, does it work, right? It's just like, hey, I've personally learned 2 languages, so English and Spanish. It's hard. I'm still learning every single day, new vocabulary, new ways to pronounce, and so on. And it's really, really hard. It takes time. So, but I just want to make sure that the solutions that we look at or we back that they work. That are learners learning faster? Is it more efficient? Is it more fun? Is it like cheaper? Is it whatever? But is there something that works? Like what is the pedagogical impact? Do they reach fluency after 6 months? Usually, do they get like a certain grade on an exam or whatever it is? But yeah. So to me, this is way. I mean, it's not way more important, but that's what. That's the main KPI that I look at when I assess a collaboration with a language learning company. Of course, as Ross said, engagement is key. You want people to come back and obviously use the app and spend time and have fun and so on. But what really matters is like, does it work really?
Okay, let me drill down on this. So how do your portfolio companies balance this educational efficiency and motivation, right? Like we came across this challenge a couple of times where it's like, do you find methods of keeping people engaged longer and teach less effective, but keep a student's attention, or is it more valuable to be highly efficient but lose the student early in the process, right? Like, so where is the right balance for the quality of the illusion of quality of didactics, really, right? And how do companies handle this well? Because it's either way. You can argue it be good or not good, right? So what does that balance look like for some of the companies that you have invested in, and is a constant struggle of finding the right portions for each of those, right?
Yes. Yes, the short answer is yes. It's rare. It's rare to find companies that are mixing efficiency and engagement extremely well. The one that I think of are unfortunately not language learning companies, but these guys do extremely well mixing content, tools, community, and the results that the completion rate is usually very high, and students are able to complete their courses in a very efficient manner without going like too fast, right? But it's rare, really. It's language learning. It's more tied to a goal, right? We have 3 companies in the portfolio, and Tandem is perhaps the exception, to be really honest here, where you want to learn, you want to reach a certain level of fluency, but you come here also to meet people, to have fun, to engage, and so on. 20X, it's really tied to an outcome: business English, improve your business English, your way to your ability to communicate, and obviously perhaps even getting a promotion, right? Because in Europe, not everybody speaks fluent English, so that might be a competitive edge for you, and so on. The third one, it's called Capiche, out of Norway, and Capiche, what they do is, do you know them, Anne?
I don't know them, but I find the name very entertaining.
Yeah, well, it's funny. So this guy, so Capiche, it's a language learning app for the workforce, right? So it's with role plays, simulation of workplace tasks, and they offer really this fun and gamified experience to take you from 0 to 0.5 or 1, but at least to help you on board. If you, assuming tomorrow we are all moving to, I don't know, Norway or Japan or whatever, we don't speak a single word of Japanese or Norwegian, but we have to start working, right? So they help you get like, hey, we're gonna help you climb that first step, and yeah. So it's really tied again to outcome, to an outcome. It's not like once you've reached that and you're on the first step of the stairs, then perhaps you're gonna have to use another solution and so on. But it's fragmented. It's today I kind of, including Babel, Duolingo, and so on. It's a good first. These are great solutions to help you to get to a certain level, but then you need to move to another solution to really keep going. So language learning, it's a bit harder to find. I mean, perhaps Ross, you have examples. I don't have one in language learning. I'm sure they are out there. I don't know them, but outside language learning, yes, I do. I have a few companies that are doing this mix amazingly well, and it's about, again, finding this balance about content, community, because people want to learn on their own too. It's not like, hey, I want to spend like time with a lot of people and learning all the time together. That's not true. So you just have to find like, hey, what is the best way for you to learn, like what is the medium or format, then what is the right amount of peer learning, and yeah, so it's tricky, but yeah, it's doable. Let's put it this way.
Well, it's complex, yeah. I mean, it's not. If it was easy, then sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I think David's example is so interesting because I think it highlights exactly sort of what needs to happen to sort of figure that out, which is you effectively have to really segment your market to figure out, what type of learner it is. And so, David's example is somebody they're doing it for work, so they're incredibly motivated, and they have to get from 0 to 1, so it has to be intense, right? Like they have a short time frame, and it's like for their work, right? And so like that, it's easy to choose sort of like the intensity versus the fun balance there. It's like it's going to be intense, right? On the other side, we have one of our portfolio companies is language learning for kids, and on that side, there is no rush, right? Like the children you're teaching are not, this is not. In most cases, in 95% of the cases at least, it's not somebody who's like moving to a new country and is like learning the language for the first time because they're moving. It's somebody whose parents speak that language, and so they want their kids to speak it, or they're just trying to do it for enrichment purposes. And so there, the goal actually may be, it's about lifelong learning, right? It's about let's give them a base in this language. Let's get them understanding how the language works, and let's keep them at it for sort of a number of years, because this is something that is not going to be, there is no sort of immediate end goal, and so you're going to get them much further along if you can keep them interested for longer, right? And so that then on that side, it's sort of easy to make the opposite switch, which is like, let's make sure that like the kids don't hate this, because the fastest way to make sure they don't learn the language is to like have them only take it for 1 year instead of for many years. And so, it helps if you sort of found a good segment that you're working with, or if you can let your user segment themselves. So Preply, for example, lets you choose the tutor you work with, and the different tutors will sort of make it clear, hey, and Preply will actually sort of prompt this to ask for it in many cases. It's like, do you want somebody who's going to sort of, give you, sort of like a drill sergeant, like, hey, you didn't study this past week, let's, you're in trouble, sort of like, let's make it tough. Or somebody who's going to say, oh, you didn't have a chance, no worries, like, here, let's do some activities today that are going to catch you up, and then next week you can get right there, right? And so if you're able to sort of help segment the population yourself in the way that you either set up your flows or just sort of through, in many cases, like how many minutes a day do you have to dedicate to language learning? And just like asking that simple question up front, you're going to get a lot of good segmentation from that. So that can be sort of a way to think about it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You're right. Yeah. Sorry, to interrupt you, but Ross is right. Look, you have like kids. It's a completely different thing, because the examples I gave, you're right, for workers. So I'm the example. I learned how to speak the beautiful English language and Spanish because of work reasons. I love the language, but still, I have this really big motivation. I'm still learning, as I said, because of work, right? I just shared 2 companies this is a new kind of companies trying to, in the chat, it's called LingoPie. It's a French company growing really, really nicely. And Wanna Listen, it's a Spanish company. And they use like an entertainment layer on top of it, just to make it a bit more sticky, a bit more fun. So you can learn a new language thanks to your favorite TV shows, for instance, or things, or via your favorite songs and so on. So anyway, so I don't know how sticky that is. We're not investors. I haven't seen the things, but it's that could be another interesting approach, I guess.
That's great. I have to look a little bit at the time, but I want to kind of ask you one last question that I think is interesting. We're always like, every person who works with Chatterbug is also an active language learner for most of the time, because we want people to be in the shoes and experience that, right? And so being major investors in Edtech and seeing all those new opportunities, one of the questions I had was like, have you, and that doesn't have to be language learning, right? Have you ever learned a skill through your portfolio companies that changed your life, or that where you massively improved in that skill? So, up to you to go into this, but like it'd be interesting to see if you actually, utilize your portfolio companies if it's applicable to you in a professional or private life as well.
Yeah, I can jump in and I can talk about a couple, and then David, feel free to as well. So Preply is one that I've used a couple of times for as I sort of have to go visit friends. I speak Chinese very poorly, but always I'm looking for sort of an excuse to practice there. Also speak French very poorly, but also looking for an excuse to practice there. For me, it's a practice. It's a place I can go for practice. I'm not trying to relearn the language. Relearn the language is really more about practice, and so that's how I've used sort of that portfolio company. I also love Masterclass, and whether it's the Anna Wintour class and sort of hearing how she thinks, or whether it's the RuPaul class and sort of learning about sort of his unique style. For me, that's more of a entertainment and learning. And then Owl actually thinks of education super broadly. So we look at things including sort of things in the mental health space, as well as financial literacy, thinking about where learning is taking place sort of outside of just a classroom. And so we're investors in a company called Stash, which is basically a financial literacy or saving and investing platform. And so that's another one I use because it makes saving and investing really easy. So I think there's a couple of cases where we try to use our own portfolio companies.
Yeah, well, look, the same applies here. We have a few. We are using tools, obviously, and so on. I would say just the ones that I use more regularly are three. The first one is called Genially. It's an investment that we have together with Ross and Owl. So it's a tool to create like a bit more engaging content. Great stuff for the education space. So we use that. I use it. I use StudyStream, which is a virtual focus room, just to go there and focus and do deep work. It's really interesting. It's potentially similar to Fiverr, right? And the one that I actually use more, and that I wouldn't say that has changed my life, but it's Iconoclast. Iconoclast, it's a sales academy here in France, right? So essentially it's a boot camp where they train students to become business developers and so on. And why am I using them? I'm using their online course because something that is never said and is never taught is that VC is a sales job. VC is about selling. You sell to LPs, you sell internally in your companies, you sell to founders. And so I actually sometimes, just like for fun, right, take some of their courses on selling. So yeah, so these are the main three that I use a bit more often than the others.
Yeah, it's on a side note, it's always interesting for like what we see is looked at, and then if you actually look into the dynamics of the job and how hard it is to actually return a fund in a profitable way and everything, right? Then there's some interesting dynamics there. Okay, great. So let me see if we do have some questions that the audience is asking. So Michael says, I'm currently doing some work with an edtech startup focusing on the third world, with so many startups what makes a company stand out, and how does one get their product in front of your eyes, actually, to be more specific.
I think both David and I have talked a little bit about this today, but I think outcomes makes a big difference to us, right? And so it's Owl will almost never, and I say almost, but we'll almost never invest in a company that hasn't sort of had the time to run a number of basically pilots or folks through their platform to really show the efficacy. We want to understand are the learning outcomes better from this product or not? And so for us to get involved, we really want to start to see some of those outcomes. And so that's probably one of the first first things that helps a company stand out. And then I think another thing is always going to be sort of the team of folks that they've assembled around them. And so VC is a sales job. And you probably know being a founder is often a sales job. You have to convince employees to join your company. You have to convince backers, your funders to fund you. You have to convince customers to buy your product, and so it's constant sales. And so if the founder's been able to sort of sell sort of a team around themselves, I think that makes a huge difference in terms of sort of helping them stand out. And then the last thing I think we think about is is the market that they're working in sort of large enough that it makes sense for a venture investor, and which is not to say that they shouldn't get funding, but in my previous life I worked at funds that rather than sort of a venture mentality of funding, which is sort of focused on hyper growth, they were focused on bootstrapped companies. And so, I always tell founders to think about, is venture the right type of investor for my startup, or should I think about other types of investors or grants or other types of funding as well? So those are sort of three things, but there's many more as well that I'm sure David has.
Sure. I'll just add one more to make it. So for you, Michael, really to get us excited, not only Brighteye, right, but like this is in general. It's really to have like this. You have like a strong value proposition, right? It's linked to, does it make sense? Like, is it a must-have? Is it really like, is learning a language? I would say in this case, is it tied to something that is necessary, or is it just for fun? But the strong value prop for me, I see four usually. It's, do you make learning more affordable, more relevant, more effective, or more engaging? Okay, I've never seen a company that has four of them. I've seen companies that perhaps have two, but anyway. So yeah, if you have that, yes, it's you can get VC attention, and obviously, given that the market is big enough and you have shown a bit of early traction, it doesn't mean monetization, but at least hey, we have an early cohort, like a few hundreds of users, for instance. I don't know, and they're spending a lot of time, they're coming back, they're really enjoying. So to get like early signals of, oh yeah, that works, and actually people are using it. But anyway, but it's really linked to the core value prop that the company has. Yeah, hope we are well answering your question, Michael, here.
So we have another one from an anonymous user who's wondering if, you talked about data and personalized learning. Do we have, from a scaling investor's perspective, do you have any privacy concerns in gathering all of the data, and how do we, deal with that challenge that comes with using data and getting a better, learning offering out there, but then we have to deal with what we gather, right? So what do you see any red alerts in that regard?
I don't. I really don't. I'm fine with that as long as it's GDPR compliant in Europe. It's fine for me. I know some people are sensitive to that. I'm personally okay with that, but it depends on people, and this is something that is usually not. I don't spend too much time on that. In all honesty, yeah.
I think the type of data that most folks have privacy concerns about tends to not be the data that's sort of a key focus in most language learning, most learning companies. The learning companies are much more focused on, if I got this question wrong, we gave this nudge, and now am I getting this question right? Or age range, those sorts of things. Language learning companies don't tend to be interested in what type of what other websites you're browsing, for example. Tends to not be a big focus, and I think that tends to be where folks have more concerns about privacy.
Yeah, I agree. I think from a company perspective, it's much more interesting to see how we can use data to improve your learning experience rather than using it to sell to third parties or use ad space and stuff like this. So from my perspective, the data privacy question is always a question of, what do we use it for? And is it for bettering a user experience in the end, or is it to hand it over or whatever? Okay, I have a question from Uber. What is your definition of traction as investors? How many users? Please be very specific about that.
Yeah, well, Uba, I'll try to bring it to you, but you have two. So we don't have a checklist. Perhaps some VCs do. I don't know. Ask Ross about that. But we don't have a checklist. If you don't have monetization, we will look for strong engagement. At least, users are growing, staying along, spending time on the platform and so on. If you have both, it's even better. But like, how many users? It depends on the solution. But assuming you're building in a language learning solution, you're building a company in the language learning space. To make it, it depends. If it's a B2C company like Duolingo, I don't know. I'm telling you, I have no idea what you're building, Uba, so it's a tough one here. But but if you're building a B2C app for language learning, if you have like 500 or 1,000 users, it's a bit tough, right? If you have like a couple of thousands, and if you're able to monetize even the tiniest amount, that's good. It shows that a product market fit. Look, the traction for us, it's really to get a sense of where you are in terms of product market fit, more than a number itself, really. So some companies, they need to have like tens of thousands of users to show a good product market fit. Some with a few hundred, it's fine. If you're a B2C company, for instance, B2B, it's another story. But yeah, so it's more like, hey, do you have a good sense of your product market fit? If so, then it's this is what we mean by traction. Then it might be you might be a good candidate for VC investment. I don't know, Ross. Oh, Anne, what's your take on this one? It's a tough one.
I like the way that you framed it, in it that it's a combination of the strength of the value proposition. So is this something that users in the long run are going to be paying cents for, or paying thousands of dollars for? And if it's cents, then we expect sort of the traction side to be much bigger than if it's thousands of dollars, right? And so understanding sort of the combination of those two is super important. And then each of us, David and I think even sometimes look at companies in slightly different stages of growth too. So we look at seed investments, but we're mostly Series A onward at Owl. And so Series A's these days tend to be something that's sort of over 500K of revenue, call it. And it doesn't actually have to be over 500K of revenue, but if I sort of take my best guess at how much your customers will pay someday for what you're doing, and how many customers you have, and I multiply those out, if it's somewhere over that, that's probably towards the Series A. If it's somewhere below that, it's probably towards the seed, for example. Would be like a rough ballpark that I might think about. I don't know, David, is that crazy?
No, it's not. And I would love to. Yeah, I mean, sorry, you're the moderator here. Don't want to switch seats, but I mean, do you have a take here on that?
Well, I mean, I think it highly depends on the stage of the company, and it depends on what the growth vision can be, right, and how good the story is. And so if you have a consumer model where you can you bring in a paid customer and that person brings in 2 other people, then you don't need hundreds of thousands of people in the beginning to show that you're eligible to a seed or a Series A funding, right? Like, I think the story is strong enough where we were like, if we can perpetuate growth within the products, it's something that for example, referral or community can trigger. I think the live event is ended.